Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Abby and you are watching part 2 of the Great Discworld Project 2021, where I will be reading all 41 Discworld novels in chronological order and making review videos for each as and when I read them. So this being part 2 is my review for The Light Fantastic, the second published Discworld novel. Like my Colour of Magic review, I will leave a timestamp in the description so that you can skip the summary if you're aware of what goes on in the book, but if you aren't aware or it's been a while and you want a refresher, we'll do the summary now. Just first of all, I do want to say, I filmed this video 2 days ago and it was an hour, which is ridiculous, which is why I'm filming it again, but I have a lot to say about The Light Fantastic, and between filming that video and now I have had conversations with 3 separate people about The Light Fantastic and developed my views on it further, so this might end up being even longer. I'm gonna try and keep it under an hour, but I've got a lot to say. We might end up being an hour. If it's an hour, get yourself a nice big drink and settle down, possibly just use this as a podcast, listen to me waffle whilst you're busy doing the dishes or laundry or whatever else. There's nothing to look at here other than my face, so doesn't matter, just put me down and walk away. So for those of you who want to skip the summary, I'm about to do the summary. For those of you who don't want to skip the summary, I'm still about to do the summary. So there's this giant red star in the sky that is rightfully freaking everyone out, especially the Wizards of the Disc. The Wizards of the Unseen University have the Octavo, a grimoire left behind by the creator of the Disc. The Octavo holds within it 8 great spells that the Wizards agree probably shouldn't be said under any circumstances. The big red star keeps getting bigger, and that makes them think that maybe they should all be said. The only problem being that one of the spells is lodged permanently in Rincewind's brain and no one knows where he is. After being catapulted off the edge of the disc, decidedly against his will at the end of the last book, Rincewind finds himself in a magical forest with an alarming number of talking trees. Thinking nothing can get worse, Two-Flower arrives and the reunited pair find their way to an abandoned witch's cottage made of gingerbread. Two-Flower and Rincewind are found by a variety of wizards from multiple sects, and the two escape on the witch's abandoned broomstick. They find themselves atop a large floating stone a good 40,000 feet in the air, piloted by a druid. Druids can make rocks float. How else do you think they built Stonehenge? Anyway, when they return to terra firma, Two-Flower is horrified to find that one druid ceremony involves the sacrifice of a virgin. With the help of an ancient and decrepit hero, Cohen the Barbarian, they rescue the virgin named Bethan. However, Two-Flower is poisoned in the fight and Rincewind must travel to Death's domain to rescue him. Two-Flower is of course thrilled to be in Death's house, and Rincewind couldn't be more unthrilled about the whole thing. During their escape from Death's domain and Death's adopted daughter Isabel, Rincewind is told by the Octavo that they, the spells within it, deliberately orchestrated that one spell being lodged in Rincewind's brain to keep it safe and to stop the 8 spells being said together before the time is right. According to the spells of the Octavo, the wizards' plan to try and use them against the encroaching evil star is a terrible idea. The group, bar Rincewind, who is busy looking for onions and discussing philosophy with trolls, are captured by bandits, but their perils are not long-lived as they have set up the camp in the mouth of a giant dormant troll called Old Grandad. He wakes up to cause havoc but is stopped by the trickle of morning sunlight. From here, the troop continue on to a city that has been completely taken over by doomsday cultists who believe the Red Star is coming to end the world because of magic and are trying to kill every wizard, burn every magical book, and otherwise cleanse the disc of magic before the star cleanses the disc of everyone. Via a magical shop, Rincewind, Two-Flower and Bethan end up back in Ankh-Morpork, where the Red Star death cultists have taken hold and are demanding that either A, the Wizards of the Unseen University bloody well do something about the star, or B, kill themselves and burn the university to the ground. Rincewind, using his knowledge of secret means of ingress into the university, breaks in to find that Trimon, the current Arch-Chancellor of the university, has locked all other high-ranking wizards in the Octavo's room and has taken himself and the Octavo off to read all the spells. He is taken over by a deluge of evil spirits and Rincewind fights him to the death. To Trimon's death, not his own, thankfully. Rincewind evacuates the troublesome spell from his mind into the Octavo and says all the spells. Meanwhile, more importantly, the Greater Chewin, the big turtle with the 4 elephants where the disc is, Greater Chewin arrives at the Red Star, encircled by 8 moons. But wait, they're not moons, those are space turtle eggs, and that means baby space turtles with 4 baby elephants on their backs. This is the greatest ending of all of literary history. Anyway, now a parent, the Greater Chewin turns away from the star and begins his swim back into open space. Rincewind, who is now kind of killing it as a person and organising the university cleanup, meets with Two-Flower, who informs his friend it is time for him to go home. He leaves aboard a ship suddenly very heavy with gold and gifts Rincewind with the luggage. Good grief. So, to front-end the review with my overall opinion, just in case anyone is really busy and doesn't have time to sit to do all of this and they just want the Cliff's Notes, The Light Fantastic is The Colour of Magic but better, but The Light Fantastic still isn't good. There you go, you can go home, you don't have to watch the rest of the video now. But for those of you who want a more detailed interpretation of what I mean by that, here we go, I guess. So the big, huge criticism that I had of The Colour of Magic, atop which all other criticisms sort of nestle, was that there's no plot in The Colour of Magic and the characters don't have any agency. Everything is being controlled by the gods and the fates and all of this, and they just have no input as to what happens to them. And The Light Fantastic has a plot. Hooray! It's a pretty classic ticking clock element with the red star. You see this a lot in books and films, the ticking clock, be the ticking clock a literal ticking clock on a bomb that's counting down, or be it big scary red star in the sky, or be it, oh, we have to get home in time for Christmas, otherwise the children will be sad. You know, like the ticking clock. It's a really simple way of adding tension to a plot, but it's a tried and true method, right? So everything that happens whilst they're bimbling around trying to figure out what to do, and these characters, Rincewind and Two Flower especially, are trying to figure out what to do, the conclusion that they come to frequently is bimble about a bit more and hopefully all of this will blow over. But they are engaging in the plot of the story. You know, it's not happening around them, but even when they're busy on little micro adventures, be it in Death's Domain, be it fanning about the trolls, there's constantly the element of the star, and Pratchett is constantly bringing back up that the star is there. Characters are constantly, every time a day goes by, you know, the star's closer than yesterday, it's bigger than yesterday, it's really warm now, it's unseasonably warm because it's coming up to Hogswatch, which is in the second winter, because they have 8 seasons on the disc. I talked about this in the previous video. But it's really warm because of the big red star, which is basically a space turtle incubator, so it's not evil. And I will give you this, okay? When it got to the end and it became apparent that the red star was not evil, was not a bad thing, I wasn't disappointed. Because there are baby space turtles, you guys. What more do you want from a book? They're baby space turtles with baby elephants. It's really not difficult to please me. If books have space turtles in them, God, if The Great Gatsby had space turtles in it, I wouldn't hate The Great Gatsby. Now is not the time to talk about how much I hate The Great Gatsby, but rest assured it's a lot. I hate The Great Gatsby so much. Anyway, ticking clock element, because it's not disappointing because the groundwork is laid throughout the book that the red star isn't a bad thing. You know, the spells hint to it, and, you know, nobody says it's an incubator for the space eggs, because that would be kind of disappointing if someone told you that, you know, at this point in the book, and then you get here and you're like, oh yeah, baby space turtles, we already been knew. But we don't know, but, you know, the groundwork is there. Basically what I'm saying is that Pratchett figured out for this book how to have a plot and how to have narrative tension and how to lay the groundwork for the reader to kind of try and figure out what's going on themselves, which is good. It's not all that interesting. It's not all that exciting, which is why I say that The Light Fantastic is better than The Colour of Magic, but it's not good, because it's quite basic. And that's the main thing. That's the main thing that I say that it's still not good. It's still quite basic. But I do want to talk positively about the book, because there are lots of things that I do like about it, and there are lots of things that are just The Colour of Magic, do it again but better this time kind of thing. So from The Colour of Magic to The Light Fantastic, I complained that there was no character growth for Rincewind or Two Flower. We do see character growth for them in here. Two Flower is still recognisably Two Flower by the end. He is still recognisably optimistic and naive, but he's learned some of Rincewind's ways. He's figured out his sarcasm. He's just clued in a little bit more, and he has a lovely speech before he goes where he talks about how a part of being on holiday is going back home. You've not gone on holiday if you don't go back, and you need to end your experience to look back on it, to have it be a special experience, which is lovely. What a lovely little thing. Like, it's not, I don't know, it's not groundbreaking philosophy or anything, which, I mean, we sort of see a little bit more of really, really interesting philosophy in later Discworld novels, but I'm not at later Discworld novels yet, I'm at this one. It's a very nice little point that Two Flower, or the book as a whole, makes, that good things must end so that you can look back on them and appreciate them, which is lovely. And, you know, that's a step on from Two Flower, because Two Flower of the Colour of Magic just wanted to see everything, including the end of the world and death and whatever else he could see, because that's being a tourist. But then he realises that he has to go home. And I'm going to tell you with no shame that I was genuinely very sad when Two Flower left at the end, which I didn't expect at all. After reading The Colour of Magic, I didn't care about Rincewind, I didn't care about Two Flower, I didn't care about a single character we came across. But by the end of The Light Fantastic, I cared about these characters. So clearly, something's better, and I think that is that the characters are allowed to grow a little bit. And same with Rincewind. Rincewind says the spell at one point, and he gets drunk on the power of having done magic. And it was very, very evocative of, if you're familiar with Good Omens, Shadwell, when he thinks that he's exorcised Aziraphale as a demon by pointing at him, but actually Aziraphale just walked backwards into the gateway to heaven, and Shadwell's running around pointing his finger like, I've got a finger and I know how to use it. And I think Rincewind there in here, after he's done magic for the first time, was definitely the groundwork for Shadwell. I mean, I can't prove that, but it's very similar. But it's a fun bit, you know, having someone who is kind of useless, kind of silly, suddenly being totally drunk on power is a really fun character bit. And that they have to bonk him over the head and knock him unconscious so that it'll calm the down is really funny to me, which is great. And just to put a bit more meat on these bones of saying that The Light Fantastic is The Colour of Magic, but good this time, looking at Hrun versus Cohen. Oh my god, it's so hot in here. I can't open the window because there are children. Hrun is a pretty straight hero for hire. He's very recognisably a hero from myth, from Dungeons and Dragons, from fantasy, whatever, and he's really egotistical because he works for photos of himself looking heroic. And that's a pretty basic element to have in your fantasy parody novel. But then Cohen the Barbarian, so obviously Conan the Barbarian is old and frail, and all his teeth have fallen out, and he's this scrawny old man, but he's still trying to be a barbarian because that's all he knows. And that's way more interesting than just, oh, look at this sexy guy, he's really full of himself. Like, so? But Cohen is really funny and really interesting. I want to say on Cohen briefly, Cohen and Bethan get married. Bethan is the virgin that they rescue from the druids. Also really funny when we meet her that she's really miffed that she hasn't been sacrificed because she's worked very hard at being a virgin, thank you. But she's 17. Cohen's in his 80s. They get married, and It's just a little bit uncomfortable. And Rincewind has a conversation with him where he's trying to be like, yeah, this marriage is a little bit weird. We're very different ages. But the angle that he's coming at it from is, you're gonna die in like 2 months, and Bethan's gonna have to spend the rest of her life being a widow. Not, she's a child, and you're an old man. But whatever, I could talk about this all day, but it's not a big part of the book. We don't even see them get married in the book. We just know that they are going to get married. And I don't have time to talk about that too much, but I just did want to mention it because it did make me uncomfy on the inside. Another element of The Colour of Magic, but better, is death. Now, we see death a couple of times in this book. Once when they are at his house and he is busy with, I believe, the Horsemen of the Apocalypse, and he's pretending to not know how to play the card game that they're playing, and that's very funny and charming. But he's also briefly seen when they go to the city and there's the death cult who are all like, the Red Star is here to punish us because of evil magic and we need to get rid of all the evil magic. And Death's there to watch. And, in fact, let me just read you the excerpt. Like some kind of goddamn video essayist. Come to gloat, whispered Rincewind. Death shrugged. I have come to see the future, he said. This is the future. A future, said Death. It's horrible, said Rincewind. I'm inclined to agree, said Death. I would have thought you'd be all for it. Not like this. The death of the warrior, or the old man, or the little child, this I understand, and I take away their pain and end their suffering. I do not understand this death of the mind. Which is just, yeah, that's Death, baby! He's not a vindictive, horrible thing who gets off on killing. He is just the embodiment of a concept, and he has the honour and the curse of being the last thing anybody sees, and taking them from this life to the next. In more, it's explained that kind of whatever you think is going to happen to you when you die does happen, which is really funny and really lovely. But we'll talk about that more when we get to more. But yeah, that's Death that I recognise. That he ends the suffering and he ends the pain. And yeah, this death of the mind. What a lovely evocative phrase. So yeah, it's again, and talking about Hrun being a kind of basic, baby's first parody hero, and Cohen being the next progressive step in push it further, make it funnier, make it more interesting. Death being kind of mean and getting off on killing people and spitefully taking the ninth of a life off a cat, and that's a very classic, as I said in my Colour of Magic video, that's a very classic depiction of death. It's just one we've seen a lot and isn't very interesting. But then we have this, we've pushed it a little bit further, and Death understands his place a little bit more, and I think Pratchett understood Death a little bit more. Something that my mum said to me when I was talking to her about this yesterday was that, as Pratchett brought these characters into full view, as he gave them their own books and upgraded them from background characters to main characters, because Death, even though he's in the Colour of Magic quite a lot, he's not a main character in it. He's definitely not a main character in the Light Fantastic. But once we get to Morton, he is a main character. Pratchett got to spend more time with them and think more about them. But I definitely think he's getting that a little bit here in the Light Fantastic. The Death is just improved a little bit. And the narration is improved. There are more times in the narration where it's funnier, it's interesting, the language is being pushed further. The Colour of Magic, a lot of the time the narration was kind of flat. Not that it wasn't amusing in parts, not that it wasn't kind of being a bit tongue-in-cheek, bit parody, but it was a lot of words explaining what happened. If you see what I mean, you know, like, Rincewind stood up, he went and got a beer, he went to the shop, you know, there's nothing interesting about the words. They were just being functional in The Colour of Magic, and a lot of the time in The Light Fantastic, they're just being functional as well. But there is one line in this book that stuck with me and I could not stop thinking about, and that's not true. There were 2 lines in this book that I could not stop thinking about once I read them. First line was trolls being nocturnal at the beginning of the universe is in the future, which I just spent 2 or 3 days in a philosophical twizzle trying to figure that one out, which it's just a really fascinating concept. First of all, that they have the sunset of the universe being the beginning, because they're nocturnal, so when the sun goes down, they get up. So it's the beginning of the day is the sunset, which was just fascinating, and it didn't need to be there. You know, it wasn't there functionally for the story, right? It was there to build character, to build culture, to make you understand the trolls and make them feel real and make them feel like they are a culture, a people who have their own thoughts and opinions on things and their own individual way of thinking about it, being rock-based rather than carbon-based life forms. Which, you know, I don't think there was much care taken in any of the kind of fantasy races that we saw in The Colour of Magic, certainly not spending any time talking about, you know, what the philosophy of the dragon riders are or whatever. They're just scantily clad people who ride dragons, whatever, move on. But here, there is care and attention taken, which is great. Which is really interesting. But the other line, let me just find it and read it verbatim, because I'm gonna screw it up otherwise. So Rincewind is talking to the wizards who are locked in the Octavo's room, but the Octavo has been taken by Trimmen, and they can't get out because the key has been taken and the room is anti-magic, so they can't magic the door open from the inside. The Octavo, in fact, isn't in here, in fact, said the voice slowly. Oh, but you are, said Rincewind, as politely as possible while grinning like a necrophiliac in a morgue. And I love that line, because could have been as politely as possible whilst grinning menacingly, as politely as possible whilst grinning with a sick amusement. Because, you know, Rincewind's been through a lot at this point, and also these are all the big fancy wizards who mocked him and derided him for being a failed wizard, because when, on a dare, he went and read the Octavo and the spell lodged in his brain, it meant that he couldn't learn any other spells, which is why he's a failed wizard. So all of these high-ranking wizards who mocked and derided Rincewind for his entire life, and he's kind of old, I think. I don't believe we get any indication of how old he is exactly, but I think he's pretty old. He's definitely not young. You know, Rincewind isn't in his 20s or anything. That he's spent a lifetime of these men's taunts ringing in his ears, and now they are relying on him to fix their problem that they caused because they're stupid. And he has this whole bubbling realization of he's in control, he has power, he is not useless, that he spent his entire life thinking he's useless, and hilariously the people who told him he was useless are useless themselves. And grinning like a necrophiliac in a morgue captures all of that so well, because it's a horrible image. It's vile, but it's evocative, and so much more interesting to read than he grinned menacingly, or he grinned with sick amusement, or any of these descriptive words, when you can instead use a simile that makes you, the reader, or at least it did for me, go, ooh. Like, it was this double reaction of the ooh. Like, that's a horrible image, but that use of language is just, mwah. Abby likes a lot. And that sort of word usage, making words dance around for you to conjure exactly the right emotion and exactly the right image, is what I find so fascinating about later Pratchett works, is that he, like Douglas Adams, for a kind of obvious comparison, I think, but they make words work for them. And I love that. I am fascinated by that. And I'm so pleased to see a couple of instances of, just writing porn in this book, when there was none in The Colour of Magic. Honestly, the more I think about how much better The Light Fantastic is than The Colour of Magic, and how I still didn't really like The Light Fantastic, I gave it a 2.5 out of 5. Not that I'm giving number ratings, but like, no, it's not. It's not fine. It's worse than fine, The Colour of Magic. Light Fantastic is still not great. I mean, it's better. I enjoyed it a lot more. But it's still, it's glimmers. It's glimmers of brilliance. It's a glimmer of death being right. It's a glimmer of language usage that's more interesting. It's a glimmer of interesting character work, but we're not there yet. We're not at the Pratchett that we all love and adore, right? But I did get into it. One thing that I want to... I got one laugh out loud moment with this book. And I didn't get any in The Colour of Magic, or I got one, I think. So, like one in each. And this one, they're in Ankh-Morpork. Everyone's rioting because they think it's the end of the world, so of course you're going to steal a bunch of stuff if you think it's the end of the world, because what does it matter? And Bethan says there are a bunch of people stealing musical instruments, and Rincewind says, looters, I expect, but looters spelt like loot, like the instrument. And that made me laugh. And then it made me very angry. That's right, I'm complimenting it, and then I'm taking it away with the other hand. Because, whilst it did make me laugh, because that's a good pun, Terry, I'll give you that. It's a good pun. It is so painfully, obviously, a setup for a joke. But Abby, I can hear you cry. It's a comedy book. Of course there are setups for jokes. Yes, but Pratchett is funny in a clever way in later books. That's not clever. It's so pointless. Why are people stealing instruments when they think the world is going to end? So that he could tell that joke. So that at some point Terry Pratchett thought of looters, and then looters... Is a lute like a guitar thing? I should have looked that up before Yeah, it's like a guitar-y thing. Pratchett thought of that joke at some point, looters and loot, and desperately wanted it to be shoehorned into the book, no matter how tortured it was. And it was pretty tortured, because it just grinds to a halt whilst we're talking about, this death cult, and they're trying to break into the university to kill the wizards or make the wizards fix the thing, or whatever it is that they want to do. They're kind of divided on the issue, but whatever they want the wizards to do something. That it grinds to a halt to talk about people stealing instruments, which doesn't make any sense. And maybe I am a little bit too angry about it. And maybe I'm a little bit too angry about it because it still made me laugh even though it's bad writing. You don't have to agree with me. You can think that's genius, but I just don't. I think it's lazy and boring. It's not boring, it's funny. But yeah, sorry, I need to stop talking about that because otherwise I'm going to spend another 20 minutes talking about how angry I am that it made me laugh even though it's bad. So moving on. Yeah, so there are a couple of really blatant inconsistencies in The Light Fantastic. One of them is that in The Colour of Magic, Two Flower, when they're at the Wormburg, whatever, he loves dragons so much, and he's thinking about a really cool dragon, and his imagination is so wild that he creates a dragon that is more impressive, bigger, stronger, cleverer than all the dragons that the professional dragon riders whose job it is to imagine dragons. I'm trying really hard to think of a way to rephrase that so that I don't have to say imagine dragons, but I can't, so we're just gonna keep going. It's their job to imagine dragons, and Two Flower does it better than them because his imagination is so huge. But then there's a line in The Light Fantastic where Two Flower turns to Rincewind and says, "You've always said that I didn't have much of an imagination." And it's like, well, when did he say that? And it's not true. But more egregiously, there is a line talking about how Trimon, once he's pinched the octavo and it's making, the world go weird around him, some of it's in his imagination, some of it's not. The stairs have turned to tongues, it's all horrible and grisly. But there's a line about him being in the pretty unused gym of the Unseen University quite a lot for a moment such as this, that he has the physical strength to run on tongue stairs and get past all of these things, some of which are real, some of which are in his head, being forced into his imagination, into his perception by the octavo. But then pages later, when Rincewind and Trimon are fighting to the death, it said that Trimon's really weak because he's never done any exercise. And it's pages, it's within pages of each other. And that's the sort of thing that an editor should be picking up, surely. So, it's still Terry's fault because he wrote it, but whoever was meant to be editing that book, come on, guys. And that's really annoying because from what I remember of Mort, of Witches Abroad, of Hogfather, of all the Tiffany Aching books, there's nothing so sloppy as a total and complete contradiction pages apart. And that just deflated a lot of my excitement for the book. And then there were baby space turtles! So it completely reinflated my excitement for the book because baby space turtles, I cannot get across to you. I don't think I've done so. Yeah, I think I've managed to be quite contained and calm about it. But the baby space turtles are the best thing that's ever happened in any book. I was tempted to just leave the video there, but I need to well, I don't need to, but I've got a couple of things that I want to talk about. So another criticism I have is Cohen the Barbarian, who is super old, doesn't have his teeth, show every word he speaks with an esh, he sh, on the esh sound, which is written in the book. Every line until he turns some diamonds into dintuas, and he can speak again. But for most of the time, and we spend a lot of time with Cohen, he's with us for pretty much all of the book. When does he arrive? Yeah, he arrives pretty early on in the book and is with us for the majority of the rest of it. He's not there in Death's Tower, and there are bits where Rincewind goes off, bits where Cohen goes off. But he's a pretty major player in this book. And all of his dialogue is written in accent is written in with the speech impediment of not having any teeth. And that makes it a bloody nightmare to read. It grinds my gears to a halt when I'm reading it and slows me right down. And maybe this is just me, and I'd be interested, again, with the Colour of Magic video, with this one. Anything and everything I say, I would love to hear your opinions on it, if you agree with me, if you disagree with me, if you have completely other things to say that I don't touch on. So I'm interested to hear if other people found Cohen's dialogue difficult to read, or if it's just me. But I have a pretty quick reading pace normally. It doesn't take me too long to read a page, but oh my god, Cohen's dialogue just slowed me to a crawl because I had to really concentrate on what the words were meant to say. Because when spoken, it's really obvious what it is that I'm saying, but when it's written down, it's, completely incorrect spellings then, and one reads by looking at mainly the shape of the word rather than looking at individual letters. You know, we're not, once we learn how to read, you know, when we first learn how to read, we'd be going, right, t, h, e, o, the, l, I, g, h, t, the liget. You know, once we get past that, you know, we're not reading it letter by letter, we're reading the shape of the word. So when you change the shape of the word, it becomes impossible to read. You know, J.K. Rowling is very famous for, well, I mean, she's famous for Harry Potter, but she quite famously writes people's accents. But that's really hard to read because, again, it's not right. Like, you can write in somebody's dialect. For example, my grandmother would never say, "give it to me." She would say, "give it me." I don't know whether that's a Geordie thing, she was a Geordie or what, but she'd say, "give it me." Which makes sense, you understand what it means. And if you write, "give it me," reading it, you go like, oh, that's a bit odd, but it's dialogue, it's somebody's dialect. But if someone wrote in her accent, it would be impossible to read because, as I say, she was a Geordie, and that's pretty impenetrable if you write it down. So yeah, but I mean, I've spent quite a lot of time talking about Cohen's speech, but I mean, it's not that bad. It's just bad in an interesting way. I'm sorry for the change in light, but the sun moved and it made my phone camera just flicker constantly, so I've closed the blinds. But just to wrap everything up, I mean, I am sure that there is so much more to say about the Light Fantastic. I have thousands of words of notes about the Light Fantastic and stuff that I haven't even touched on yet, but at recording time we're at 45 minutes. Hopefully it'll be a little bit less than that once I've cut out all of my mistakes. But it's still pretty long, so I just wanted to say thank you so much to everyone who's watched the video to this point, and the other videos. I have genuinely been quite bowled over by the response that these videos have gotten. I didn't think anybody would care, but a few people do care, and I have received thoughtful, interesting, long comments on both videos that are up so far, which is brilliant. I have enjoyed responding to the comments so much. I love talking about literature, I love talking about Pratchett, and I'm just so pleased to have a few people come along with me on this journey. It's really motivating, it's really lovely. Yeah, I'm just genuinely so pleased that people like this and seem to like me. Yeah, that's just really cool. So part 3, of course, we will be looking at equal rights. I'm only a few pages in at this point, but we're meeting the witch. Hooray! We're meeting Granny! I've been informed that Granny isn't quite Granny yet. That's fine. I'm interested to see Granny's naissance. So thank you again for watching. So if you agree, if you disagree, if you have opinions on the Light Fantastic and it's things that I haven't even touched on in this video, please do leave a comment about it down below. And if you're interested in seeing the rest of this series and you haven't already, do subscribe to the channel. It would be lovely to have you here. Thank you so much for watching again, and I will see you all soon. Goodbye.